He described me dying, there, in the middle of the road, with details that no one could invent. To this day it destroys me inside, not because of what he said, but because everything, absolutely everything, began to come true. I was the only rescuer available that morning. It was raining heavily, visibility was almost zero, and the plant had sent me the location of a lone accident on a little used road. I figured it was just another one, someone drunk maybe. But when I got there, he was already sitting outside his car covered in blood, as if he'd been waiting for me. I can't explain what I felt when he looked at me. It was as if he knew me. And then he said, my name, my age, the exact time I would die, the place. You will die just like me. Same place, same time, and no one will be able to save you. He passed away minutes later in the ambulance seat, but since then, every detail of that night has started to repeat itself, like a marked trail, and I'm just someone, following without a choice. I first sensed something was wrong 2 days before that. A strange pattern in the calls, disjointed statements from other victims. But now, looking back, I realize the signs started much earlier, maybe that week, or that call from the dispatcher. Or that first time I heard my own name coming out of the ambulance radio, even though there was no one on the other end of the line. Have you ever had the feeling that someone knew too much about you? As if somehow your story had already been written by someone else? Because what happened after that sentence was just the beginning. I still have no idea what it was, a warning, a curse, or just madness. But everything he said started happening. And I'm here to tell you what no one else would believe, so press the like button, subscribe to the channel and stay until the end. You'll understand why that night never ended. I don't usually talk about my life outside of the ambulance. Those who work in this field understand. We learn to compartmentalize, as if each service were a little box that we pile up in the back of our minds, hoping that we never drop everything at once. But I always carried a box that weighed more than the others. And that night, for the first time, I felt that it had cracked inside. At the time, I had been working the night shift for almost 13 years. I started young, full of adrenaline and a desire to make a difference. I had that silly speech about someone who believes they will save everyone. At first, every siren made my heart race. After a while, my heart didn't race as much anymore, and when it did race, it was more out of fear that I was too tired to react properly. I hadn't slept properly for weeks. The weight of the belt, the smell of dried blood, the creaking of the stretchers, all of this begins to invade your body, as if you were an extension of the hospital itself. I remember that week, specifically, I was at my limit. It wasn't just the sequence of events, but an uncomfortable feeling that was growing inside me. Like a mental itch, I would forget simple things, mix up dates, have nightmares that I couldn't remember when I woke up. All that was left was the sweat on the back of my neck and that feeling that someone had called my name in the middle of the night. That day, I was on duty with Silas, my partner for a few years. We had a practical relationship, few conversations, many late nights shared in the cramped ambulance seat, the kind of companionship that is built without having to say much. He had lost his wife a year before, and since then he had immersed himself in work, as if escaping from the empty house was the only way to keep breathing. I respected his silence. He respected mine. It was the end of a particularly long night. The rain had started around 3 o'clock, and the sound of the drops on the aluminum roof of the base was almost hypnotic. I was just getting ready to close my eyes for about 15 minutes when the radio crackled with that muffled hiss, typical of a power plant on stormy days. The voice came out distorted. Unit 47. We have an incident on Estrada Velha do Fundão. Rollover. 1 vehicle. No information about victims at the scene. Can you confirm? That road. I don't know why, but the mention of that name made me feel immediately uncomfortable, as if someone had stuck a cold finger between my vertebrae. It wasn't just the history of accidents, and there had been many, but what people were saying about the place. Drivers swore they saw lights coming from the woods. Others spoke of shadows, of radios that stopped working at exactly the same spot. A lot of road talk, something we learned to ignore. But at that moment, I couldn't ignore it. Silas answered before I could. He was always the first to confirm, a type of discipline that I had honestly lost. The ambulance engine roared in the darkness as I adjusted my vest with trembling fingers, not because of the cold. I was Sweating despite the low temperature, it was as if my body was warning me that something wasn't right. The road to Fundao was a crooked path of poorly maintained asphalt and trees too thick on both sides. The ambulance's headlights seemed swallowed by the darkness. Water ran down the windshield so hard that the wipers could barely keep up. At each turn, the tires slid a little, and Silas clenched his jaw on the steering wheel. I kept my eyes on the side of the road, looking for any sign of life or death. The radio suddenly made a loud hissing noise. It wasn't a voice. It was a sound, a metallic click followed by something that sounded like breathing, deep breathing. The kind of noise you don't know if you actually heard or imagined. Silas glanced at me, saying nothing, but I could see it in his eyes. He had heard it too. The road seemed endless that night, and the strangest thing was that we couldn't see any other cars. None. Not coming or going. Not a headlight, not a taillight, not a tire track. It seemed like the world had stopped just so we could pass by. After about 20 minutes, we saw something up ahead. It was hard to tell clearly, but the reflection of the headlights caught something metal, crumpled. A car. It had flipped over on its side, leaning against the ditch. "There," I murmured, pointing, even though I knew he had seen it too. We stopped the ambulance about 50 feet away. Protocol said to approach with caution, assess fire risk, check for victims. But standing there, staring at the scene, nothing seemed like protocol. It felt like a trap, something that had been placed there, waiting. I got out of the ambulance and was the first to approach. It was raining heavily, and the sound of the water hitting the leaves, the puddles, and the roof of the car was almost deafening. I approached slowly, walking around the vehicle. It was completely destroyed. The roof was caved in, the windows were broken, and the wheels were still turning. Slowly. But that wasn't what really stopped me. It was him, sitting next to the car at the edge of the woods with his legs stretched out and his head resting on a low branch, was a man, alive, bloodied, but alive, and staring at me. What broke me at that moment wasn't the blood, nor the silence. It was the look in his eyes. He didn't look scared, nor in shock. He looked calm, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing there, like someone who had been waiting for that moment. "Sir, can you hear me?" I asked, kneeling down next to him. He responded with a smile, slow, inappropriate, and he said something that, at the time, I didn't understand. "You're early." The sentence cut through me like a cold razor. I didn't ask what he was talking about. I just started checking his vital signs, his visible injuries. His pulse was weak. The left side of his chest was rising with difficulty, probably a fractured rib. He had dried blood near his temple and a deep wound in his left leg. I had treated victims in worse conditions, but nothing and no one had ever looked at me like that while I was dying. Silas approached with the stretcher. We both lifted the man carefully. He coughed with effort, and that was when he said it, something that should never have come out of anyone's mouth. But that's another part. Now tell me, have you ever heard someone predict their own death? And yours too. Blood ran in warm rivulets down his side, mixing with the wet earth and leaves trampled. By our arrival, I could hear the irregular dripping like some kind of organic clock marking the time he had left, the kind of wound that demands a quick response, but already carries the unmistakable smell of the end. The light from Silas's flashlight shook in the wind, and the rain pelted down slantwise, cold, irritating. I knelt down, hurriedly pulling on my gloves, and began checking for signs. Irregular pulse, low blood pressure, dilated but responsive pupils. He was lucid, by some miracle, or for some purpose that I didn't yet understand, because the way he looked at me wasn't like someone asking for help. It was like someone who knew exactly what he was doing there. "Take a deep breath, okay?" I murmured, trying to keep my voice calm, even though I felt the skin on the back of my neck shiver inexplicably. He didn't answer right away. He just kept his gaze fixed on me, a dark, almost unblinking gaze, as if every second he was analyzing me from within. I had seen a lot of things, from children burned to old men who had died holding my hand, but that look, it wasn't one of pain, it was one of certainty. That's when he spoke. The voice came out low, rough, as if the words were being torn from the entrails. "You'll die like me. Same time, same place. Only you'll be alone." My hand stopped in mid-motion. The tourniquet slipped from my palm and fell into the mud. I stared at the man with a knot in my stomach, hoping he was delirious, that he was just one of the many. People who spout nonsense when their bodies go into shock. But that wasn't it. He was lucid, calm, almost at peace. He didn't smile or even blink. He just looked deep into me. And then, as if he had finished what he needed to say, his eyes closed. His body slumped slightly to the side like a candle that has gone out at the end of its wick. "Hey!" I shouted instinctively, putting my fingers on my jugular. The pulse was still there, weak but present. Silas had already approached with the stretcher, but he froze when he heard the sentence. I noticed. He pretended not to have heard, but I know he did. The way he avoided looking at me in the following minutes said it all. We loaded the man into the ambulance. The stretcher slid awkwardly through the mud, and for a moment her foot caught on a protruding root. I had to push it up with my shoulder, and when I looked back at the man's face, he was smiling. It was a subtle smile, almost imperceptible, as if, even unconsciously, he knew what he had just done to me. I'm not an impressionable guy. I've made decisions under gunfire. I've delivered babies on the side of the road. I've lost victims in my arms. But at that moment, inside that stuffy ambulance with the sound of the rain turning into a kind of white noise outside, I felt contaminated, because there was something there, something that wasn't physical, as if his words had become trapped in the air, hanging like thick smoke that wouldn't dissipate. And worst of all, I believed them, even if it's for a split second, even if it's in the back of your mind where logic can't reach. The ride back to the hospital was short and long at the same time, short in the minutes on the clock, long in the silence that accompanied us. Silas said nothing. I said nothing. Only the irregular beeping of the vital signs filled the cabin, and the words, those damned words, spun in a loop inside my head. You will die like me. Same time, same place. Only, you will be alone. Each time I replayed it in my mind, more details took on weight. Why did he say same time? Did he know the time? Did he know where I was? How did he know my face? And the part that bothered me the most, alone. Why? Upon arrival at the hospital, the nurses rushed to receive the patient. There was no time for anything else. We transferred him straight to the operating room. I stood in the hallway, leaning against the cold wall, feeling my clothes stick to my body, the smell of blood on my fingers. Even after I had taken off my gloves, my mind refused to accept any rational thought. For a few minutes, all I could think about was internal silence and the terrible feeling that something had been set in motion, something I couldn't undo, something that was pulling me to a place I couldn't see. The emergency room door slammed shut. A doctor rushed past. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. People talked on phones. Nurses typed up charts. Everything seemed normal, hospital routine, but nothing about me was routine anymore. I was still stuck in that moment, in the mud, in his eyes, in those words, in the absurd certainty that he wasn't delirious. He knew, he saw me, and worse, maybe he came for me. As I was leaving the hospital that same morning, I was still shaking as I pressed the ambulance key. Silas was still quiet, and I didn't insist. The radio was silent. The sky was still pouring a light, steady rain, and inside me, a new fear was taking hold. It wasn't the fear of death. It was the fear of living something that was no longer part of what I knew as real. And now I'm here trying to understand. How could someone know so much about me before I even knew what was coming? Have you ever heard anything like this? I lay awake for more than 30 hours after that night. My exhausted body begged for sleep, but my mind wouldn't turn off. I would close my eyes, and the scene would come back to me in its entirety, as if it had been imprinted on the inside of my eyelids. The bloodied man, his eyes fixed on mine, the sentence, "You will die like me, same time, same place, only you will be alone." That wasn't a sentence spoken by someone confused or delirious. It was firm, almost solemn. I tried to rationalize. I tried. At the hospital, the doctor who took over the case said he hadn't survived the surgery. Internal bleeding, multiple fractures. The protocol had been followed to the letter. He arrived alive, but he didn't last. I should have let it go. Buried it as just another remarkable, tragic but explainable occurrence. But it stuck in my mind. In the days that followed, I began to notice things. Small, at first. A detail there, another here. Coincidences, I kept telling myself. But even coincidences, When they start to line up too much, become something else, they become symptoms. The afternoon after my shift, I took the same route home as always. But for the first time in years, I got lost. I can't explain it. It was an automatic route, which I took almost in my sleep. But I turned down the wrong street, and before I knew it, I was on a road I didn't recognize. The GPS didn't work. The cell phone signal disappeared. It was only after almost 20 minutes of driving in circles that I found my way back. I arrived home with my clothes stuck to my body, my forehead freezing. And not because of the heat. It was as if my body knew something was wrong, even without any proof. Night came slowly. I turned on the TV, but didn't pay attention. I tried to eat, but the food tasted like metal. The sound of the street seemed louder. Every car that passed seemed to slow down in front of my gate. And inside my head, that phrase echoed like a sentence. I finally lay down. I passed out from exhaustion, not rest. And in the middle of the night, I woke up with the kitchen radio on. I never leave the radio on. I went over there, dizzy, my eyes still a little blurry, and listened. It was just some random song, meaningless, but what made me stop was the announcer telling me the time. 3:18 in the morning, the same time of occurrence, the time that appeared on the man's medical record. Exactly. My skin crawled. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, panting. This wasn't ordinary fear. It was the kind of fear that doesn't scream, that doesn't run, that freezes. A dense fear that weighs down the air, that makes you feel watched even when you're alone, especially when you're alone. In the following days, I tried to act normally, but normality, when forced, turns into theater. At work, everything seemed the same, but I was no longer present. My colleagues noticed. They commented that I was distracted. One of them, Julio, even joked, "Are you seeing ghosts, brother?" I smiled to the side, but inside it wasn't a joke. I began to write down the little episodes. The radio that turned on by itself. The nightmares that always came at the same time. A figure perhaps behind the curtain. The strange reflection in the bathroom mirror. A whispered phrase amidst the static noise, just like me. I no longer knew what was real, but I felt, with every fiber of my body, that there was a connection between that man and what was beginning to surround me. And then, the coincidences stopped being small. The following week, I was called to an incident. Time, 3:14 a.m. Location, near the entrance to the same road. This must be some kind of joke, I muttered on the way, trying to ignore the ice forming in my stomach. It was an old man who slipped while trying to get his cat on the roof. It wasn't serious, but the clock on the wall of his house was stuck at 03:18. Again, I told Silas. For the first time, he didn't laugh. He didn't make a joke. He just looked at me with the same look he had that night, like someone who didn't want to say anything but knew something was out of place. The obsession slowly took over. I started reviewing the ambulance recordings, the records of the incident. I went back to the hospital after hours to try to find out more about that man. Name, history, origin. But the information was incomplete. Only the first name was listed, Ezekiel. No documents, no fingerprints. No one came to claim the body. A homeless person, maybe. But his face didn't look like someone lost on the street. It looked like someone who had come from somewhere specific, to something specific. That sentence was not a hallucination. It was a message. And the more I tried to escape the idea, the more it imposed itself. I began to see signs everywhere, and in a fit of desperation, I tried to ignore it. I went to the bar, tried to distract myself, but everything seemed to pull me back. Music on the radio, the sign flashing the number 3:18 at the entrance. The waiter who turned around and said without context, "Some things are already written, right?" It wasn't about what he said anymore. It was about what I was starting to believe, that he was right, that I was marked, that this story had started before me, and that now I was part of it. I first noticed the pattern by accident. I was sorting through some old papers in the base's records section, the kind of task we tend to put off until we can't do it any longer, when a handwritten, nearly illegible sentence stopped me in my tracks. It was an incident report, a service call on a country road, dated for 2 weeks from now. Strange, since only past records should have been there. I thought it was a filing error. Someone in a hurry filling out a form in the wrong field. But there on the file, in the bottom right corner, in a space that should have contained the name of the victim who was rescued, was mine. My name, my surname, as if I had been attended to by myself. I stood there with that paper in my hands for minutes. The silence in the file room seemed to scream. The fan creaked in the ceiling like a broken clock, and the sound of my heartbeat echoed inside my chest with enough force to make me dizzy. I sat down on the floor, the report still in my hands. The paper was shaking. Or was it my hand? I don't know. What I do know is that right then, in that moment, some part of me understood. This was no coincidence. I went home that night without speaking to anyone. I avoided Silas. I avoided answering his texts. I locked the door, turned off all the lights, and sat in the dark. The paper was still in my jacket pocket. I folded it 4 times, as if that would make it less heavy, but the writing on it had already sunk into my skin. It was then that I began to pay attention to what the victims were saying, loose words spoken between moans, delirium, and fainting spells that I had not noticed before, or had ignored, as every professional does to maintain their sanity. But now everything seemed different. A man with a head injury, before passing out, grabbed me by the collar and whispered, "You've been here before, haven't you?" A woman injured in a domestic accident, completely out of her mind, I cried, "You shouldn't be here again." Again. This idea of repetition, of cycle, began to appear with frightening frequency. Completely different people, in unrelated situations, with the same kind of expression, fear, urgency, and the impression that something was not in the right order of things. I began to write these sentences down. I wrote them in a small notebook, hidden in the ambulance closet. It was like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle in which all the pieces were made of the same material. Fear, deep fear. Not the fear of blood or pain, the fear of what you can't see, but what you're watching, always watching. It was in one of these early mornings that I felt for the first time what I can only describe as a presence. It was around 3 a.m., of course, always between 3:13 and 3:18 a.m. The cursed hour. I was on a routine occurrence, transporting a stable patient between 2 units. Nothing out of the ordinary. But as I drove, I felt as if something was sitting in the back seat. It wasn't a light sensation, it was physical. The weight, the displacement of air, even the sound of the tires seemed muffled. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing, but the cold sweat ran down my spine like an icy finger slowly moving down. Silas was sleeping next to me, his head leaning against the glass. I considered waking him, but something inside me told me not to speak, as if speaking out loud would break a barrier and allow the something inside me to respond. I pulled the ambulance over to the side of the road on instinct. I had to get out, breathe. The night air was thick, humid, almost solid. I stood there, alone, with the headlights still on, waiting for the oppression to pass, and for a second, I swear to God I heard my name, whispered, coming from inside the ambulance. I didn't get back in. Not then. I walked around the vehicle, knocked on the front door, and called Silas. He woke up with a start, gasping, as if he were having a nightmare. He said he had dreamed that I had disappeared in the middle of the journey without a trace, that he had found the ambulance empty and inside it, only the uniform folded on the driver's seat. He tried to laugh it off, a dry, nervous laugh. I couldn't laugh or respond. We just got back to driving in silence. That had gotten past the weird. The following week, 2 more reports. A teenager who was run over and, while being intubated, muttered, "It's happened before. It'll happen again." A child who fell off his bike and had convulsions. When he regained consciousness, he looked at me and said, "You're going to come back," just without the ambulance. And then came the worst part. During a late-night shift, between one service and another, I decided to review the recent records in the internal system. On impulse, I searched for my own name, something I had never done before. And there it was. Not 1, but 3 future records, incidents dated for the next few days. All with the same name, mine, all with slight variations in the fields, as if someone had tried to fill them in little by little. One was listed as collision victim with death. Another, unconfirmed disappearance. The third, there was no description, just the name, my name, and a status code. Pending closure. I slammed the computer shut. I left the base with my heart racing, my body shaking. I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood streets until daybreak, and along the way, I saw the same shadow 3 times, the reflection of someone passing too quickly between the lampposts behind parked cars. But when I turned around, Nothing. Nothing visible, at least. From then on, I understood. It wasn't just a curse, it was a count. As if every speech, every victim, every phrase said was a sign. As if the story had already been written, and the only one who hadn't accepted it yet was me. And now, I need to know. If you saw your name on a report that hasn't happened yet, would you have the courage to continue answering calls? That morning the radio crackled again at 3:14 a.m. It was always like that. The control center would call, the voice sounding muffled, slightly distorted, as if it were passing through a glass corridor or a tunnel of water. But this time, there was no voice, just a hiss. After a few seconds, the system issued an automatic notification. Occurrence registered. Estrada Vela do Fundão. Possible rollover. The blood drained from my face. A cold sensation filled my chest, as if my entire body had been plunged into a tank of ice. The same road, the same time, the same call. But this time, Silas wasn't with me. He had tested positive for dengue fever 2 days earlier and had been sent away. The ambulance was mine alone. For a second, my hand hesitated over the ignition. I could have pretended not to see it. I could have ignored it. But some force inside me, perhaps the same one that had kept me doing this job for more than a decade, pushed me forward. The rain was light, almost a constant curtain. The drops tapped against the windshield like impatient fingers. The trees on the road formed shadowy tunnels, and the ambulance's headlights seemed swallowed by a thicker-than-normal darkness. With every meter, the silence inside the cabin seemed more alive. The sound of the engine, the whine of the wipers, everything sounded distant, as if I were watching myself from outside my body. At the first bend in the road, a déjà vu so intense came over me that I had to stop for a moment. The image of the man sitting in the bushes, staring at me, hit me with full force. I could almost hear it again. "You will die like me." But I continued. Around the second bend, the radio crackled again. No message, just a sharp metallic crackle, as if a cable had been cut mid-transmission. Then, silence. The dashboard screen went blank for 2 seconds, then came back on. The cabin lights flickered. That's when I saw the headlights. At first I thought it was another car that had crashed. The headlights were pointed straight at me, tilted upward, as if the vehicle had hit something and rolled over on its side. I slowed down and looked around with the flashlight I always keep on the passenger seat, but there was no sign of anyone. No other vehicles, no movement, no sirens, nothing. Just the rain. The ambulance stopped in the middle of the road was just like mine. Identical. Same color. Same scuff marks on the side. Same fleet. Number painted in white on the hood. 47, my unit. I stopped meters before colliding with her. I got off with shaky legs. The rain got heavier, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Thunder boomed in the distance, and for a second, I wished it was all a delirium, a lack of sleep, a break in reality. But it wasn't. I approached slowly, my heart hammering as if it wanted to rip me out of my chest and drag me away. Each step made the mud suck my boot. The parked ambulance was running. The key, interior lights were on, and inside it something was waiting for me. My reflection. The driver's seat was empty, but the passenger seat had something. A folded uniform, my uniform, just like the one in Silas's dream, folded perfectly, the buttons aligned, the badge still clipped to the pocket, and on the driver's seat, my stethoscope, rolled up, carefully positioned, like I did every end of shift. My name, on an embroidered label, blinked in the darkness, reflecting the light from the flashlight. I froze. A chill ran through my entire body as if all internal systems had failed. Time, sound, everything seemed to freeze for a few seconds. I felt my throat close, the air trapped in my lungs, the world tilting beneath my feet. I tried to speak, to call someone, to say my own name, but only the sound of the rain answered. I touched the driver's door handle. It was warm despite the cold. I opened it carefully, expecting anything. A body, a message, a scream. But there was only silence, and the rearview mirror pointed straight at me. There, for the first time, I saw myself from the outside. Pale, wet, tired, eyes too deep for a normal morning. And behind me, something moved, but when I turned around, there was nothing. I closed the door. I took a step back. Another. And I kept retreating, like someone trying to escape from something that hasn't yet shown its teeth. The siren of my ambulance. The the one that brought me there, went off on its own. A sharp sound, tearing through the dawn like a blade. I ran back. I locked the vehicle, turned everything off. But the feeling that something had been sealed there didn't go away. And then, on the radio, a final sentence. Clear. No hiss, no familiar voice. Just 4 words, spoken as a final sentence. Now you know. The display went blank. The rain stopped. And for the first time in years, I was certain that something had crossed the line between what was real and what never should have been. I didn't want to open the door. I stood there, my hand trembling on the doorknob of the ambulance that wasn't mine, or maybe it was, feeling the invisible weight of what I hadn't seen yet. The rain had suddenly stopped, but the sound still seemed to be there, vibrating in the back of my ear, like when you leave a concert and everything pulsates in echo. The air was still, almost too dense to breathe. Each breath felt like pushing cement into my lungs. But I opened it. The inside of the ambulance was too clean. It didn't make sense. It was an active unit on the road in the middle of the night. It should have been dirty, worn and scarred like mine. But there was no blood, no crumpled papers, no empty glasses, just a brown envelope resting on the passenger seat, as if it had been left there by someone who knew I was coming. I sat down slowly. The bench was warm, as if someone had just gotten off it. My hands were sweating. The envelope looked like a regular hospital envelope, with the edges slightly wrinkled from the humidity. But there was something written in pen in a firm handwriting. File 318 RA, my name, my initials. I took a deep breath, trying to rationalize. It must have been a coincidence, an identification error. Someone at the base had filled it in wrong, but the date was there, today's date. And the time, so 3:18. The digital display on the dashboard showed exactly that. Shelter. Inside, a common medical record, standard format for pre-hospital care. Filled out data. Name, age, blood pressure, saturation, all with my details. Exact information, intimate details which were not in any system. Old scars. The fractured ankle I had when I was 12. Even a discreet note. Reacts badly to ketoprofen. Avoid. Frozen. I read the last line of the form. Time of death, 03:18, declared in the field. The paper slipped from my hand. The world seemed to get small, narrow, as if everything around me was shrinking, squeezing me into an invisible box. My mouth went dry. My hands went cold. And then, without thinking, I looked in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw him. He, the man on the road, sitting in the back of the ambulance as if he had never died, as if he had never stopped watching me since that first night. Same face, same gaze, intact, no wound, no scratch, as if he had never bled, as if, in that version of the world, he was the most alive thing in there. I froze. There was no sound, no wind, no breathing, just that gaze piercing through the mirror straight into my eyes. And the worst part wasn't seeing him. It was what he did next. He smiled, slowly, controlled, a smile that wasn't one of joy or provocation. It was the kind of smile someone gives when a plan finally comes to an end, or a beginning. I tried to turn around, but the back seat was empty. I looked in the mirror again. There he was, sitting, still, smiling. Why? My voice came out in a hoarse whisper, more fear than sound. He didn't answer. He just looked at me, like someone who had already said everything he needed to, like someone who knew that nothing more needed to be explained. My hand was shaking. The paper was on the floor. The envelope was open, like a symbolic coffin exposing what should have remained sealed. Every cell in my body was screaming to get out of there, to run, to disappear, but my feet wouldn't listen. I stayed there, frozen on the bench, like someone waiting for the inevitable, like someone who finally accepts that they have lost control of their own story. At that moment I knew it wasn't a warning, it was never a warning, it was a delivery, a reminder. That had already happened, or was yet to happen. Or maybe it was happening now. I just didn't know where I was on the line. The ambulance siren turned off by itself. The engine stopped, and I stood there, trapped in a silence so dense that reality itself seemed to have retreated, shrunk, leaving space for something to take its place, something that had no name, but had a face. And now, after all this, I can only think of one thing. If your death was already written, would you want to know how it would happen? Since that night, I have never been the same. And I'm not talking about trauma in the usual sense, the kind that makes you have nightmares, that makes you more closed off, more skeptical. I'm talking about something that sticks to your existence, like an invisible odor that no one else can smell, but that you carry with every breath. I didn't go back to night shifts. I made excuses, asked for changes, accepted a reduction in my workload. They offered me psychological care from the network, but I couldn't explain. How can you explain something that doesn't even fit into your own logic? How can you tell someone that you saw your own death written on a piece of paper? That you talked to someone who was already dead? That you saw someone's reflection in the mirror while the bench behind you was empty? Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody would know what to say. But even far from the early hours of the morning, it haunts me, because what happened on that road didn't stay there. The road came with me, inside my head, inside the empty spaces of my house, from the moments when the radio turns on by itself at 3 in the morning, whispering my name as if someone was still waiting for me to answer a call that doesn't exist. I've changed cars 3 times. Ambulance 47 has been decommissioned, I'm told, but there are nights when I pass by the base, and I swear by everything, the reflection of those red lights flashing at the end of the yard. Always at 3:04 a.m. I've tried to forget, to pretend that nothing was real, but the body doesn't forget. It remembers in subtle ways, the shiver that comes from nowhere, the feeling of being watched, the sound of the radio crackling when it shouldn't. Sometimes I'm stopped in traffic and I hear the siren, low, as if it were very far away, but no ambulance passes me by, and the worst of all is the wait. That file, the date, the time. I haven't arrived that day yet, but it's coming, slowly, like a cold current that runs up your legs in the sea, like a car that appears in the rearview mirror, closer and closer. Every morning, I wake up at 3:18 a.m., sometimes to the sound of my name being whispered, sometimes to the smell of wet earth in the room, sometimes without air, but always with that feeling that someone or something is just waiting for me to accept, for me to stop running, me to get back on the road. And I know with everything in me that that night wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something that still walks beside me, something that wears my uniform, that holds my badge, that knows the color of my voice and the way I breathe when I'm about to go into a situation. I look in the mirror every day, and there are moments, quick, almost imperceptible seconds, when the reflection doesn't react at the same time as me, when it smiles before me. Some deaths don't happen all at once. They arrive little by little, like light rain in the early morning. You only realize you're wet when it's too late. If you've made it this far, you already know that some stories stick with us, because somehow they speak to something we feel but have never been able to explain. And if at any point this video made you look twice in the mirror, or feel that shiver that has no explanation, then it has already done what it needed to do. Now, you can help others have this experience too. Like and subscribe. It keeps these stories alive and helps me continue to bring you more stories that perhaps should never be forgotten. Comment the word below eco. Only those who understand what this means will know. And hey, the next story is already appearing on the screen, but I'll warn you, it goes deeper than this one, because some things don't end. They just change shape. Go on. I'll see you in the next video.